India wanted the United States to back it in the same way that China, for example, has backed Pakistan.
We saw for the first time, drone warfare and missiles, being used to attack each other deep inside both countries.
Global Eyes.
Welcome to Global Eyes, the podcast that rewrites the playbook on geopolitics and security with new perspectives and voices from the Global South, coming to you from Deutsche Welle. I'm Shani Rosanas, a commentator and producer at Deutsche Welle, covering international politics and security, and especially with a focus on the Middle East.
And I'm Waslat Hasrat Nazimi, journalist, author, and someone who's been watching this conflict up close for many years, keeping in mind the Afghan perspective. In this episode, we examine how shook up Asia is after the latest Kashmir flare-up, how are regional powers adjusting their strategic postures, and what role can or should outside powers play in mitigating future escalations?
Let's jump right in with our guests. First, I would like to introduce Praveen Donti, senior India analyst from the International Crisis Group. Welcome, Praveen.
Thank you for having me.
And our second guest today is Sahar Khan, an author and independent security analyst focusing on South Asia. Welcome, Sahar.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we want to begin with a very simple but crucial question. How dangerous is the new normal that we're seeing?
I think it's quite dangerous, to be completely honest. This has been the sixth time that India and Pakistan have kind of had a crisis since they became nuclear weapon states in 1998. And I suspect that there will be another crisis. It's just a matter of time. So I think the new normal is very, very dangerous, especially as we're seeing the interplay of various military technologies. The more advanced the technologies get, I think the more dangerous the next crisis will be.
Praveen, what's your take?
Yeah, we witnessed the most serious hostilities between India and Pakistan since 1971 when they went to war with each other. And for the first time since they became nuclear powers, the conflict escalated faster than ever in the past. And now the situation is pretty precarious, and we're just one step away from another limited war breaking out between both the countries.
Praveen, so now let's cut through the military rhetoric. What's really driving this crisis? Threats from across the border, or is it pressures from within?
Where does this conflict over Kashmir leave Modi and his nationalist government domestically, regionally, internationally?
India-Pakistan relations have always been susceptible to domestic political calculations, more so after Prime Minister Narendra Modi has come to power. The foundational animosity between both the countries that goes back to partition underpins the relationship between both the countries. And the Hindu nationalist BJP, which is in power right now in New Delhi, uses that to its political advantage.
And in Pakistan, Sahar, General Munir's approval ratings were low until now. Where does this conflict leave the Pakistani military domestically?
Well, in the short term, when the conflict began, the Chief of Army Staff, General Aasim Munir, as you pointed out, his ratings were very low, but he's come out quite strong, and not just him as the individual, but also the military itself. And Pakistan had a general election last year in which the military, I think, played a stronger hand than it would have liked, and the public responded in a way which was surprising to the military. They voted for independent candidates. They sort of pushed back against the military rigging of the elections. And since that moment, or even I would say a couple of years before that, the military has had a really low rating in Pakistan. But this conflict, the chief of army staff, he came out really strong, and now, just I think it was yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, he was announced as the field marshal, which is more of an honorific title, but it's more or less a promotion of sorts, and I think that also reflects the government sort of is indicating that they favor the military's role in this particular conflict. So the Pakistani military though is different when it comes to the public interplay. Generally, the Pakistani public has always been supportive of the military. The military is seen as one of the only institutions in Pakistan that gets things done, that works efficiently, and that is also a way for people to climb the socioeconomic ladder. That image has been damaged because ever since Asim Munir became the chief of army staff, this conflict has helped it a little bit, but I'm not I think it'll be something to watch this space. But I also think that this conflict has sort of helped his own personal ambitions of wanting to secure more power within Pakistan domestically.
Yeah. And I think historically, from an outside perspective, it felt like at least that it never really mattered who is in the government. It's actually the military in Pakistan who is the ones who are actually in power. And I feel like this pattern is familiar. External conflict is used as a tool for internal legitimacy. How do domestic political needs shape aggressive foreign policy, especially when nationalist sentiment is high? Which leads me to something, Shani, I came across when preparing today. It's a line summarizing the work of sociologist Zygmunt Bauman. And it's not a direct quote, but it's basically summarizing what he said. War is not the failure of politics, it's the triumph of unresolved identities. And it really struck me because it doesn't only apply to Pakistan and India, but to so many other conflicts where you have a crisis, a conflict where it's not actually about politics, but about what went wrong. And I think oftentimes we can lead it back to colonial continuities that are still in effect in these countries. What do you think?
Well, I think we cannot ignore the colonial legacy, of course. And the region I'm coming from, the Middle East, also has, more than a fair share of that. And it's still shaping up politics to this day. But I wonder, when we talk about, there's a lot of talk about identity politics. And I think when we talk here about unresolved identities, it's true that if you try to look maybe at modern Syria or modern Lebanon, that maybe they have not fully unanimously agreed on what this new entity drawn by colonial lines would look like, and this could be the source of some of it. But I think also that in many ways it is actually those identities, those very unique identities, cultural, ethnical, that we're seeing, that they're religious, of course, that they don't get enough room. And this is when I try to look at the roots of wars, I'm thinking it is the lack of vision that brings us there. Politics failing to see a creative, flexible enough structures that allow these identities to coexist in a productive way. And I think, the separation of Kashmir and India is a great example of how this very gruesome line of partition was drawn in the after effects that are so, dramatic and still very saddening and affect the lives of so many millions and millions every day, 70 plus years after.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting is that nobody really cares in this whole conflict about Kashmir and what the Kashmiris say, right?
And this is where we're going back to you, Pravin and Sahar. Let's bring maybe Kashmir as a player here. Would it be fair to say that there's a unique characteristic, maybe one unique Kashmiri voice that we need to be hearing and listening to when we want to understand this kind of conflict and where it's heading?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In these conflicts, anytime India and Pakistan sort of have a crisis, it's always the Kashmiris who suffer, and it's their voices that are never heard. In 2020, Al Jazeera English had done a survey of Kashmiri youth, in which it was a limited survey because of their limited access there. But the survey basically showed that Kashmiri youth, at least in a unified way, wanted less security forces, which indicated to me, at least, that Kashmiris are the one, at least in Indian administered Kashmir right now, are facing a lot of suppression and repression. Security forces have increased over time. There was a ceasefire agreement between India and Pakistan in 2021 that was implemented in 2023, and that did result in a reduction of violence along the LOC, which is also the line of control. But overall, what that has meant, though, for Kashmiris living in Indian administered Kashmir is that there are a lot more security forces. They have very, very little freedom to move around and sort of act in their everyday life. Kashmir is also known as one of the areas that where there are many victims of pellet guns. So many young people have been blinded by pellet guns, and once a pellet gun hits your eye, it's very hard to get your eyesight back. There have been killings, abductions, cases of arson, dislocation. So I think in this crisis, you are absolutely right to point out that it's the Kashmiris who we don't hear from. We never hear from what do they actually want, because My sense also is, from my limited access, I mean, of course, I just have open source access, is that Kashmiris are also divided in what they want and what they need from Indian security forces, what they want from Pakistan, what they want from the international community. And so I do hope that this crisis at least lets encourages both governments to hear from the Kashmiris.
Maybe let's stay there. I mean, what do they want, Praveen? Will this encourage more calls for separatism and independence?
It's a difficult question to answer. Kashmir is looked upon as the one of the unresolved agendas of the partition itself. And the ruling party, the BJP, wanted to fully integrate Kashmir as part of India in 2019 by scrapping the special status of Indian administered Kashmir, which gave certain special rights to the local residents. And so it sort of triggered insecurities among the locals, and there has been growing anger and alienation on the ground, which would have created a certain conducive atmosphere for the April militant attack that led to loss of 26 tourist lives. To answer your question, what do Kashmiris want? I think it's $1 million question. Nobody really knows because nobody's ever asked them. As a journalist and as an analyst who's been visiting the region for a long time, I think every person is an island of opinion. They want basic freedoms to begin with, like anybody else, but they have not been given that. Successive Indian governments, including this government, has looked at Kashmir only as a piece of territory that needs to be with India at any cost, kept with India at any cost. So that leads to a lot of violation of basic fundamental rights. And their fight has been about political self-determination. That's what it is. There's been an anti-India insurgency since 1989, which has been going on. There has been many ups and downs, and we've entered a new phase of militancy after 2019. There are a new crop of militant outfits that the stated goal of resisting the moves that New Delhi has been making in the region since 2019, such as scrapping the special status, diluting the demographics because it's the only Muslim majority region in India, by bringing in more and more outsiders and more and more Hindus, thereby diluting the Muslim character of the region. There are these insecurities that are playing out, and the militant outfit that claimed the attack on the very first day before backtracking uh, referred to these outsiders coming in. They referred to 83,000 domicile certificates that were given to outsiders to come and settle down in Jammu and Kashmir. Many of these factors are playing into the insecurities of locals.
Let's bring another actor, the elephant in the room, and this is China. And I want to ask you, are we now in a position of a triangular conflict, or would it be better to describe it as India facing two fronts? How would you see, China now positioned after the recent attacks?
The Kashmiris always complain that the conflict is framed as a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. But it is true that China is also a player because in 1963, Pakistan had ceded a part of Pakistan administered territory called Shaksgam Valley to China uh, because they've had a boundary agreement. And China took a stand that they will talk to whoever is in possession of the region after the problem is resolved. So from that angle, China is one of the claimants in this problem, or one of the players. But also after 2019 changes, that New Delhi pushed through, what it had done was that it created two federally run union territories, and one of them is Ladakh, which is claimed by China. China condemned the decision of New Delhi to reorganize the state into these two territories. Since then, I think China has been quite interested in what is happening in this region, also because it has invested heavily in the Pakistan administered Kashmir with its investments in China Pakistan economic corridor. So, China, in that sense, is truly the elephant in the room here.
China's influence, how has it been seen in Delhi, Praveen?
It seems New Delhi is not completely grasped the the extent to which China is interested or playing a role, I, for one, think that they did not really consider the China factor when they went ahead with the 2019 changes. Uh, I also see that as one of the factors that led to the border crisis between India and China in 2020, soon after. I look at it as one of the many reasons that contributed to the border crisis between India and China.
Would you say that it gives Pakistan more security? They feel more bold in their interaction with India, knowing that they have the Chinese back?
Probably that's how geopolitics, work out, right? It's a smaller power. When it ceded the territory to China in 1963, probably that was the idea to bring China, make China party to the conflict. So they refer to each other as ironclad brothers. So one of the biggest insecurities of India, the strategic insecurity, is a two-front war, where it has to deal with both Pakistan and China together. With the United States exiting Afghanistan and the diminishing utility of Pakistan for the United States, it seems like China is willing to more than fill up that gap that's been left behind by the US in terms of helping and supporting Pakistan.
Yeah, just today, Wednesday, May 21st, the Afghan foreign minister, he's in China. Also, China pledged that they would invest heavily in Afghanistan's infrastructure. And I also feel like that China has been taking over the role of the US, which the US is not able or does not want to longer play in the region. But Sahar, what conclusions can we draw from this confrontation about Chinese military technology versus Western gear? And I think we all saw the images. I saw so many videos, Chinese propaganda videos, making fun of the Western military gear. What do you think?
This is the first time, this particular conflict, this is the first time that a lot of Chinese weapon systems have been used in combat. So, at least about 10 or 15 years ago, the general idea in the United States and its allies and major defense partners was that Chinese weapon systems are simply not efficient enough. But, this particular crisis has shown that Chinese weapon systems are efficient, and especially the J-10C fighter jet that Pakistan used, and the PL-15 air-to-air missiles that are Chinese made that Pakistan used in this conflict. So I think this is actually a wake-up call for the United States and also for its Western allies. There's a general thought that the Chinese don't make weapons efficiently, or they don't make good ones. And of course, I think that this crisis highlights that that's not the case at all. And I think for Delhi to sort of, jump on Praveen's past comments, I think I agree with him that I don't think Delhi has completely grasped how tight of a relationship China and Pakistan have. And this relationship also is tough to know entirely like how close they are, because China is very close-lipped about it. Anytime the United States, for example, helps an ally out, the United States very much does a very chest thumping action, right? Like, look at us, we came to the rescue, we helped out. We kind of saw this right now with the Trump administration as well. Anytime China helps an ally out, it does it quite quietly, to be honest, and it does it in a way where it sort of sees its own benefits. So while
Which
it's
begs the question, Sahar, did China win the Kashmir war after the Pahalgam attack?
Well, I will say that nobody won in this crisis. I think there are many analysts like myself who basically couldn't sleep 4 or 5 nights trying to figure out, like, does this mean a nuclear war or what it is? In terms of this sort of concept of China winning, I also think this is very much a Western way of thinking and dealing with conflicts. There's always a winner and there's always a loser, and the reality is there really are no winners in this situation as well. And if you look at especially the narratives of on the Pakistan side and the Indian side, they're both claiming victory in different ways. And even in the Trump administration, you have President Trump basically claiming victory for bringing these two sides together. And so I don't think that there really is any winner. The one thing that is highlighted, though, is that is that India, I think, might feel that it needs to do more investment in its defense manufacturing industry. This is something that's highlighted in the US India defense relationship as well. And I think India probably feels the pressure a little bit more after this particular crisis. And the second, I think, thing to highlight is that the Chinese have caught up in terms of weapon systems. And that's something to watch as well. And it has implications for the Indo Pacific eventually.
Well, Praveen, still, I know it's a Western view, but are there winners and losers? Is China the big winner?
Well, again, the West tends to look at every conflict from its vantage point, and it should be more looked at as a new nuclear flashpoint rather than looking for winners and losers, and trying to figure out whether Chinese aircraft have done better than the French and Russian aircraft, etc. Because those are not the biggest lessons. Though I think the defense attaches of the West were keenly following the hostilities, and probably that also turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because they realized the escalation was going at a faster rate and both sides were not really in control of these escalation dynamics. And 2 days after both President Trump and Vice President Vance washed their hands off, saying we don't have much to do with this conflict, they've been fighting for 1,000 years. They immediately sort of rushed to take credit for pushing through a ceasefire. So the dangers are real, and we are looking at a nuclear flashpoint, and that's the biggest lesson. It's not about the strengths, because India is the most populated country right now. It's the largest democracies. It has a huge economy and a market. Everybody is trying to woo India and sell their weapons as well. So it will upgrade its military and equipment, etc. Sooner than later.
But I think, I mean, we can still say that Modi expected more from the US, right? I think it made it very clear that the American-Indian relation is not that tight. Does it leave Modi vulnerable?
Both the US and India need each other. It's a bit of an equal relationship almost, I would say, because India has been drafted into the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US. And since then, they've been growing closer to each other, which is why the regional rivalry between India and China is now intertwined with the big power rivalry between the US and China as well. So that is another, angle that one should not lose sight of about these India-Pakistan hostilities. Geopolitics are pretty, complex, and every conflict is related to other conflicts, and a regional sort of war would affect the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US itself.
If I can just add to this point, I think for the U.S. India relationship, certainly I think India is really frustrated with the United States, because my sense is that India wanted the United States to back it in the same way that China, for example, has backed Pakistan, or it wanted the United States to back India the way that the US backed Ukraine and backed Israel. And of course, the India relationship, that bilateral relationship, is a solid one. I think I'm not even sure if it's okay to say that there's been a hiccup or they're so annoyed with each other. I think it's highlighted both. It's put expectations in check. So India is a very strong has a strong relationship with the United States, but it's not technically a US ally. It's called a major defense partner. And that is a major difference to keep in mind when we think about how allies work. The way that China and Pakistan have behaved are the way that allies behave, in the same way that we've seen North Korea come to the aid of Russian forces in Ukraine. This is the way that allies behave, but the way that major defense partners behave is a little more transactional. So I think the bigger lesson here is that when you think about the US India relationship, what does it mean for the different theaters of war? And I think the main theater of war, besides the India Pakistan conflict, which is something that I really follow, but is also the Indo Pacific, right? If there is a Taiwan contingency, then what role would India play in that? And I think India has been very clear to say that they will not be on the front lines with other US allies, that they might help out, but they're not entirely sure how they will help out quite yet. Um, And India is really the only country that has been able to toe this line in Ukraine. And so I think that this conflict, or the US's role or backing of India, sort of reflects this dynamic of the relationship. So I will say that it doesn't mean that the US India bilateral is weakened in any way. I think it's strong. It's just a lot more transactional than I think India even realized itself.
Well, it's also very much fitting with Trump.
It's a reality check for New Delhi, probably. There is a certain discomfort, between India and the US. India and Russia have an all-weather relationship. It's grown organically over time, and they trust each other very well. India and the US are getting there, but it's going to take some time. And like Saher said, this limited war, if you would like to call it that, has come to India as a reality check. The ecosystem that supports the government and the ruling party, they've been deeply disappointed with the United States and other allies, also the Quad partners, for not coming in support of India.
There's just so much information and so much to process. And what really struck me was when you guys, Sahar called it main theater of war. And I think this is really something that it was a spectacle, right? It was also like an arms demo for the world with so many arms and military gear coming from different countries. What do you think? Is there now a risk that South Asia will become a testing ground for rival military technologies, Sahar?
So, to be completely honest, I've always considered South Asia as a testing ground. South Asia is the only region in the world that has two nuclear weapon states that are actively modernizing their conventional and nuclear arsenals. And, it just really hasn't been on the radar of I would say, major Western countries, and which is a shame because this sort of dynamic that we're seeing, it didn't just happen out of the blue. There's been a ramp up to this, and now I think the world is paying more attention. I will say that India and Pakistan also have considered themselves as really responsible nuclear weapon states. And so while they sometimes want third party crisis management, they want the US to come in, or China to come in, or the EU to come in, they've been also kind of reluctant, and have said that, listen, we know how to handle ourselves because we have our differences, but we also have a few agreements in place in which we talk about, like, there's a nuclear non-attack agreement called the NNA, and there's also a ballistic missile pre-notification agreement, so that anytime they test missiles, they notify the other, so that they know that this is not an act of war, this is just a testing ground. So Pakistan and India, for the most part, despite some of the optics, have actually been responsible nuclear weapon states and have been in communication with each other in military testing specifically. But I think now, because this is the first crisis where we see Chinese, American, Russian, and French weapon systems really interact in a way, right? And I think the highlight has been a lot of vulnerabilities have come up as well. And so, at least, I mean, I'm not necessarily a military analyst, but I think a lot of military analysts will be paying attention to exactly, you know, what kind of things happen this time around that shouldn't happen next time around, in terms of electronic warfare, in terms of radars and drones and whatnot. So in my view, South Asia has always been a testing ground. This idea that it's sort of just been siloed or doesn't need to be paid attention to all the time, I think has been a point of luxury for the bigger states like Russia, China, and the US. And I don't think that should be the case anymore after this crisis.
Are we in danger of losing those mechanisms? You were talking about those mutual safety mechanisms that keep of these nuclear powers at check.
To be honest, yes, I think so. And it's actually the Indus Water Treaty that gave me pause. I mean, the Indus Waters Treaty has been around since 1960. It's not that easy for India to get out of it. They need the World Bank to sort of renegotiate it. But India and Pakistan have fought many wars, and they've been, especially along the line of control, there are always some sort of skirmishes going on. And so when India this time around said that it basically, wanted to suspend the Indus Waters Treaty, I think this sets a precedent of that some of the bilateral agreements that exist between India and Pakistan are now basically up for grabs. And regardless of what happens with the Indus Waters treaties and the agreements that I've been paying closer attention to are what we call nuclear confidence building measures. So the non-attack agreement that was negotiated in 1988, and then the ballistic missile pre-notification agreement that kind of follows the NNA. If these agreements um, basically kind of fall through, I think this will be a bigger problem because already India and Pakistan don't really have diplomatic relations. Since 2019, India recalled its high commissioners from Pakistan, and same with Pakistan as well. And in this crisis, each side recalled their military diplomats. So the air, naval, defense attaches all were called back home. And the problem is when you don't have diplomatic relations and when you have something like track 1.5s and track 2s declining, it really creates an environment of inflated threat perceptions where you don't really understand what the other side is doing, what the other side is thinking. And while they both have military doctrines, it's not really clear what will happen. So I do think it's a bigger issue if these diplomatic agreements weaken.
What I'd like to add is, since both are nuclear powers, there is a nuclear threshold beneath which they have to keep fighting, right? There is very limited space to hurt each other, and now that space will be explored to find probably new creative ways to hurt each other, because this time we saw for the first time drone warfare and missiles being used to attack each other deep inside both countries, and it probably was very close to the red line, which is why the United States and other international powers stepped in. I feel like going forward in the future, there will be a lot more of the same in terms of weapons and technology, but they will be trying to find ways to hurt each other in within this threshold, but in new damaging ways, because it's become a battle for optics. There has been an explosion of disinformation, which also surprisingly allowed each other to claim, each other to claim victories over the other people, the other side. So that also might be a trend in the future. Both have enough to claim victories and then they exit. And this new normal is going to create havoc, especially along the border areas. The North Indian cities saw swarms of drones for the first time, and so is the case on the other side, I'm sure. So yeah, some of these things are red flags, and they don't portend a stable future at all.
Praveen, Sahar, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it was very insightful. I learned a lot, especially because since I am a neighboring country of Pakistan, or I come from a neighboring country, I feel like what really saddens me sometimes is that it's basically the people who are suffering the most. It's the Kashmiris, it's the Indian and the Pakistani people who have so much in common, who share so many experiences, who are being divided, which we can see all over the world, unfortunately. But who knows? Maybe we will get there one day.
Well, let's hope so. We have to keep on hoping. Thank you all for your time, and thank you for joining us today for this episode of Global Eyes. I'm Shani Rosanes.
And I'm Waslat Hasrat Nazimi. We'll see you next time as we keep our eyes on the world.
So please subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
And give us a review on your platform of choice.
Global Eyes, a new take on security policy by DW.